Shabbat Shalom. Last night, we talked a little bit about Parashat Shmini and the idea of how God punished Adav and Avihu for really, we do not entirely know why or what they did. But what is clear to us is that the punishment was, if you judge it by contemporary measurements, really unfair. And this morning, the Haftorah is kind of like more of the same. In this morning's Haftorah, we find Uzzah and Ahio, who are commanded with carrying the ark that was being rescued by David because it was taken away. And if you remember, when we came in contact with the ark, we were not supposed to touch the ark, only the poles through which we handled it. And at one of those moments in the journey, they stumble, and the ark is about to touch the ground, and Uzzah rushes to pick up the ark, and in that moment, God kills him for disobeying the commandment of not touching the ark. And so again, just like in Parashat Shmini, we can spend hours and hours debating, why does God do this? Why? Isn't Uzzah trying to do something good? Isn't he trying to pick up something holy that's about to touch the ground? And there's many ways to look at this, right? So let me offer a very peculiar way of looking at it this morning, which is in my mind actually a good way of understanding what's happening. So God actually commands the Jewish people with many things. One of them, perhaps the most important one, is to always choose life. And we choose life almost over everything. There are a couple of exceptions. There's 3 exceptions that are listed in the Talmud. But aside from that, which are idol worshiping, incest, or spilling of innocent blood, we are allowed to do whatever it takes to remain alive. So the lesson here is, there is no object, there is no thing that is more important than a human life. Uzzah, by throwing himself under the ark, could have been crushed. And the lesson is, nothing is so holy that you have to give your life for it. Now, of course, Judaism is very peculiar in this, because in other religions, objects take on an aura of holiness that actually transcends humanity. And I'm going to give you an example that's actually a very tough example to swallow. The land of Israel. Do you know how many times we have offered incredible amounts of land to our enemies to be at peace with us? Since the partition, 3 other times, including Jerusalem, and every time they walked away from it. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, one of the big problems that we have as Jews is that we tend to believe that our enemies are just as good as us. We can't comprehend or understand a world where somebody tells you, look, have half of what I have so we can live in peace, and the other person doesn't take it. Because we as Jews understand that living in peace and living your life takes precedence, but not them. And throughout history, we've made the mistake of trying to think that our enemies could be just like us. We have this incredible moment in the Pesach Seder where we take the drops of wine out of the cup with our pinkies to diminish our joy, because we cannot rejoice while God's children are suffering or being killed. Well, that's very romantic. But that's our vision of the world the way we would like it to be. We would like everyone to understand the world this way. But dear friends, I just think that it's not possible. I was watching a documentary on the First Lebanon War on Israeli TV, and they were interviewing a historian who was saying that we as Jews do not understand something. The Middle East doesn't speak Yiddish. They speak Middle East. Think about the power of this statement. We believe that Israel is a European country. I mean, we the Ashkenazim, and I say that, by the way, with a lot of care, okay? I don't really mean it. We the Ashkenazim, I'm being sarcastic, made Israel happen. So of course it's a European country. But no, it's not. It's a Middle Eastern country. And we need to understand our surroundings the way our enemies understand them. We can't speak Yiddish to them. They don't speak German or French. One of the moments that changed my life, really literally changed my life, was about 40 years ago. I was exactly 19, and I had started to work as the youth director in the conservative synagogue in Mexico City. And the rabbi, who I just was beginning to get to know, who became one of my closest friends and my mentor, Marcelo Rittner, called me to his office out of the blue. And I said, oh my gosh, what did I break? So I walk into his office, and there's a man sitting there. And he says, I want to introduce you to Elie Wiesel. And I had no idea who this guy was. So I sit down, and my rabbi gives me a book written by this man, Elie Wiesel, that's called A Jew Today, which is a collection of essays, the greatest essays that he wrote loosely. And Elie proceeds to take the book and ask me for my name, and I tell him Felipe, and he says, no, your real name, your name in Hebrew. So I say, my name is Pinchas. So he wrote in the book a dedication for me, which I still have in my office till this day. And I really think this was one of the moments that profoundly affected me and set me on the path that I am today. Now, Marcelo then said to me, my rabbi said to me, you can ask him any question you want. And I had no idea what to ask him. I'm 19 years old with Elie Wiesel. So, and I know Marcelo was trying to be nice, that he's always been nice to me. But he had no idea, I had no idea. So, and I didn't want to let on that I didn't have any idea. So, I asked him, what is the greatest lesson you learned in your life? And Elie Wiesel looked at me, and without missing a beat, he said to me, the greatest lesson I ever learned was that instead of believing in the promises of my friends, I need to believe the threats of my enemies. I will never forget that. Because if you take that statement, that's the world in which we live today. And I never thought that 40 years later, I could use that statement and apply it to the world that seemingly has nothing to do with the world that Elie Wiesel grew up in. As a matter of fact, that book, A Jew Today, the first essay in the book, talks about his childhood in Sighet in Romania and how he saw the world in two different shades, Gentile and Jew. It was them and it was us, almost like the way it is described in The Fiddler on the Roof. It was a world of polarity. So he, like many of us, spent his life trying to understand not what his enemies were going to do to him because he knew what they were capable of, but why can't we believe that they really will do it? People ask me all the time, can you believe what's happening? I said, yes. All the time I said, of course I can believe what's happening. We've been saying never again. By the way, next week is Yom HaShoah. We've been saying never again for decades and decades, almost for 100 years. And we always said never again, should never again happen to us or to anybody else. Never did we think that in our impetus to say never again, we will be talking about ourselves once again. This is almost impossible to understand. But think about 1939. Every single country in the world closed its doors to the Jewish people, including this one, including Mexico, including Canada, except for the Dominican Republic. That's a truth. That's an irrefutable truth. The St. Louis was sent back from here to our certain death. Those same countries that turned their backs on us, look at them today. And don't tell me you're surprised at England and France and Spain and Austria. I'm not surprised. And if you're surprised, you're too naive. The history of the world and the history of our people has taught us that our enemies will stop at nothing, and we better take their threat seriously. Shelley Berkeley, whom you all know, one of my favorite people in the world, member of our congregation, mayor of Las Vegas, when she was in Congress, she had the opportunity to be at Auschwitz for the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And she tells a story, and I'm never going to forget this, that it was so cold that you could feel the wind hitting your bones past your flesh. And she was there with all of these Congress people from the United States and people from all over the world. And suddenly the silence that you feel at Auschwitz, because it descends on you, was broken by 6 F-16s that flew from Israel to Auschwitz and back. And immediately, the Ramatkal, the chief of staff of the Israeli Armed Forces, stood up at Auschwitz and said, "We are 60 years too late. We will never again be late." That's the one thing that I always think on the eve of Yom HaShoah. We will never again be late. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to our grandparents and their families and our great-grandparents. We can't believe the version of the world where we diminish our joy because our enemies are suffering. That vision of the world, by the way, was created by the rabbis because they wanted to stray away from controversy. And they didn't want to be perceived as calling on God to really, really finish their enemies. They lived in a world where they had to watch their every move because you set your foot in the wrong place and the sword would descend on your neck. But we don't live in that world. We have to be proud of who we are. We have to be proud of our people. I received a letter from the March of the Living, which I'm going to be participating in next week. So I'm spending Yom HaShoah in Auschwitz this year. And by the way, I'll tell you in a second why I decided to go, but I received a letter that said 50 Holocaust survivors are going to be accompanying us. The last time I went on the March of the Living, there were 1,000 Holocaust survivors with us. Joel, the last time you went on the March of the Living, there were probably 5,000 survivors. Our world is changing. And by our world, I mean our world that we live in. The stories that we heard firsthand, the numbers that we saw with our own eyes will no longer be there. We don't have the luxury of romanticizing history and believing that our enemies could ever be like us, because they won't. They don't speak Yiddish. And so, dear friends, this Yom HaShoah, of all of the ones that came before, is one of the most important ones. Because like I said last night, we just prevented another Holocaust from happening. And we're still in the midst of it. And we still don't know where that uranium is. And make no mistakes, our enemies are not good. They have no humanity. They don't revere life, they revere death, just like the Nazis, worse than the Nazis, because the Nazis cared if they died. They didn't. The Nazis walked away from Auschwitz and tried to destroy it. The Nazis walked away from Treblinka and blew it to pieces. There's only rocks there. These beasts videotaped October 7th. And by the way, these are the same beasts that sit in Tehran and Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Make no mistake, this Yom HaShoah is different. And we have to make sure the world hears us scream, never again, and that we really mean it. And not never again that we're going to call upon everybody to defend us. No, we will defend ourselves. Because we have to remember that if we don't, the world will be a very different place. And even if those around us refuse to understand it, the world without the light from Zion, without the Or Mitzion, will be a world that will sink in devastation. Tomorrow, 4:30 p.m., here at Temple Beth Shalom, our commemoration of Yom HaShoah for the entire community. Come, listen, be inspired, remember, and say never again, as if we meant it, as if we felt it, as if we can't live without that coming out of our mouths every single day of our existence. Shabbat Shalom.